And I write about a lot of these stories because I think many people think that some of this is like they're predestined to do something great, and I
Hmm.
just don't believe that. I think
Yeah.
many of them realize something either early in their career or later in their career. It doesn't matter when they realize they're put on earth to do something special, and they take that first step. And this is where I really believe that anybody can take that first step, and I'm hoping I can be that, even if it could be a small spark, be that initial spark, so that they're willing to give themselves a chance.
All right. Welcome to this episode of Hyphen Nation. Today I'm joined by my guest and friend, Grant Lee. Grant is the CEO of Gamma. Gamma is an AI platform for creating presentations, documents, and interactive web pages using prompts. It is now a $2.1 billion company with probably more than 50 employees now, I'm assuming, because you just raised $60-some million, but with over $100 million in ARR and was 70 million users. I'm guessing much more now already. They grow so fast I can't keep track. Proud investor through Hyphen Capital in our community. And just thank you so much, Grant, for taking the time today, because I know you're very busy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
So let's start from the beginning, Grant. I know you went to Stanford, but let's go further back from there. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in the East Bay in California, so a small town called Pleasanton. A little bit bigger now, but it's pretty
Yeah.
small back in the day.
So you're a local Bay Area boy. You went? Have you ever left the Bay Area? If you went to Stanford and you've been in these companies since?
Yeah. I've left a couple times. So I was actually born originally in New York. My
Okay.
parents came from Taiwan, and then we were there for a little bit, and then they eventually moved to the Bay Area. Grandparents on my dad's side were actually living in San Francisco. They had a
Mm.
small business in the sort of dumpling space, and so we ended up moving to be a little bit closer to them. And then, yeah, basically, we settled down in Pleasanton. Grew up there most of my childhood. Eventually went to school at Stanford, and then spent 10+ years living in San Francisco. And then actually we had a short stint in London. We moved there for my wife's work for a couple years.
Mm.
This was peak
That's awesome.
pandemic. Ended up, my daughter was born there, and then we started Gamma, and then we realized that obviously to be with the team, we're going to move back to San Francisco. So that all happened, basically right around the
Yeah.
pandemic. We ended up moving back in 2021.
So basically, Bay Area for life, except for 2 years in London. Is that right? Nothing wrong with that. I have a lot of friends who've been around the Bay Area their entire lives. So what did your parents do when they were in Pleasanton?
Yeah, they've held many different jobs, basically whatever they could to kind of provide for the family. When we first moved to the U.S., they were running their own restaurant. Then when we moved to the East Bay, they were working for a period of time between different restaurants. Originally, they got connected to a few different restaurant groups. My dad was oftentimes like helping manage or doing various jobs there, and then they opened up their own restaurant as well for a period of time. My parents ended up having to work multiple jobs when I was growing up. So both my parents actually worked for the post office for 30 years, 30 plus
Oh, wow.
years. They retired somewhat recently, which has been really exciting. But yeah, they ended up working for a period of time. We owned the restaurant. My mom was actually working during the day at the post office, and that night would run shifts at her own restaurant. And so I think that was my sort of first sort of look at entrepreneurship, maybe
Hmm.
a very different type of entrepreneurship, but
Hmm.
the type where you are, sacrificing a lot in hopes that, you can make a lot, you can do something for your family and really take care of your family.
Yeah, probably have part of the upside. I think the assumption is that everyone that comes from Taiwan, their parents came for graduate school and got some engineering degree and was working at IBM or Bell Labs or something. But your parents came and they were grinding at restaurants and just hustling for. Was it just you, or do you have siblings?
I have a younger brother, 12 and a half years younger. So for a good chunk of my childhood was basically an
Single.
only child
Yeah.
until a bit later. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so Stanford. I mean, every kid in the Bay Area dreams of going to Stanford, but not every kid gets a chance. Like, what was that like for your parents when you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously very exciting just to have that opportunity. It was also a little bit, surprisingly kind of a difficult decision because of just
It's
thinking about how
expensive.
much money it costs to
Yeah.
get in, right? Like to actually go. And, we obviously didn't come from money. And so how would I even pay for it? The honest answer is my parents never let me sort of worry about that. They said
Mhm,
we would figure something out. I
mhm.
obviously also applied for every scholarship possible and tried to just make sure that I could make it easier. But they highly encouraged me to go, even though I think if I were looking at their situation, it was very unclear how we would make it all work.
Yeah,
But they've always been the sort of super supportive parents where they would never let that sort of pressure be on me to
yeah,
figure out or think
yeah.
about. They just wanted, what was best.
And growing up in Pleasanton back then, was it very diverse or not very?
Not very diverse. Yeah, it's definitely changed over time, but I can count on basically two hands the number of Asians in my year, and certainly we look broadly. Our class was 400 plus, so we weren't
Wow.
it wasn't necessarily a small school, but yeah, it wasn't as diverse as it is today.
Yeah, I always hear kids from Fremont or, like, Mission High School. I'm like, "Oh, a lot of Asians back there," but, I mean, in Pleasanton, 2 hands for the whole school or class?
For my class,
Okay.
I think, yeah.
I mean, that's
Beyond that,
still
but yeah, yeah, it wasn't that much more.
yeah. And did you experience any kind of racism, discrimination growing up?
You know, I at the time, I don't think I've really felt it that way. I try to, make friends with a lot of different groups. So for me, I tried to get into athletics. I was part of starting a breakdancing team at uh, at Foothill, which is the high school I went to. I definitely had kids, friends that were, you know, in all the AP courses. So I think for me, I didn't necessarily see it, but you could probably just sense that a lot of the Asians would end up hanging out together just because it was harder for them to feel like super integrated with with the rest of the class. But I'd say in general we felt lucky that for sure our school in general was very open minded, and I think in general we had a group of very kind students, and it was a great place to grow up.
And then you go to Stanford, and there's, like, a ton of Asians, and so you're, like, meaning what was your experience at Stanford like? Because I imagine there's a lot of pressure because your parents, like, sacrificed a lot for you to go there. You study biomechanical engineering, very practical, employable major, but, like, what was it like, your experience at Stanford?
I mean, to be honest, I almost felt like an outsider there just because I wasn't as used to being part of an Asian community. And in so many ways, I was kind of searching for my own
Mhm,
identity. I came from a place where it wasn't necessarily ever sort of top of mind. I tried to make friends with everybody, but then you enter a very different type of atmosphere, and you're almost just asking yourself like, yeah, what am I? Where do
mhm,
I fit in?
mhm,
What community do I belong to? And so
mhm.
for a long time, I didn't, I wasn't really sure. I kind of just let it sort of happen organically. And, I made friends probably like most people do, where find people that are in the same dorm. And, for me, a lot of people that live on the same floor, and you hang out together. To me, I never, it was never in my mind what background you're from, or like, are you Asian or not? It was just like, do I feel like we could be close friends? Those are the people I end up, really trying to form, friendships with, and many of them I still stay in touch with today, which has been awesome.
And so you went through Stanford and you stuck around, you co-termed for, uh oh, we were biomechanical engineering, you co-termed for mechanical engineering for a master's?
That's
So you
right.
stuck around for 5 years, is that right?
Yeah, 5 years.
Okay. And now then there's a gap in your it's LinkedIn, so I don't know what happens between there and Optimizely, but where'd you end up after graduation?
Yeah, so I definitely took some of a windy path post graduation. For me, when I was studying mechanical engineering, I thought, okay, maybe someday, specifically, I was focused on medical device design. Maybe I'll, join one of the companies there and build medical devices. It was actually for me the year between my senior year and my master's year, sitting sort of alone in one of the labs there, realizing like this just didn't feel like the career for me. I love being surrounded by people. I love the sort of pace of trying to move things really, really quickly. And I think it's a good thing that in many ways, medical device design is a slow process. You do want high quality output. You do want a lot of engineering and research to go into it, but also means that oftentimes, the progress can't be felt very quickly. And I think just my own sentiment, my mentality maybe just wasn't well suited for that.
Mhm.
I started just kind of exploring what sort of adjacencies were out there. Like, what else could I do with my skill set? And I was fortunate, a friend kind of introduced me to a pre MBA program at Berkeley at Haas, where a lot of folks that came from like an engineering background could take some MBA courses over the summer. And it was my first exposure to business courses, and that's where I started understanding like, oh, maybe there is a world where rather than building physical devices, I can help build a business or build a company and take a lot of the same frameworks around problem solving and really going 0 to 1, but apply that to building a business as an entity. And that part of it sort of excited me. I ended up spending a few years at a few different consulting firms and did like investment banking, and that was like my exposure to just seeing what it was like to really, what does a great business look like, what does it take to actually build something from the ground up and operate at that scale. And so that kind of took me down the path of, ended up getting really into sort of finance and leveraging that lens as a way to just understand the mechanics of a business. That eventually led me to join Optimizely as its first finance hire. So this was a startup, at the time one of the fastest growing YC companies. And I actually knew Dan, the co-founder of Optimizely, from Stanford, from college. So he was one of the people I met. I was alluding to friends that I met,
Your
freshman
dorm?
year, same
It was
dorm.
oh, your
Yeah,
floor too? The same
and
floor?
so our what was that?
Were you same floor too?
Same floor, yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow, floor mates. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and so, over time, just building on that friendship and, I was actually I was at an investment bank called Montgomery& and Company. It was a boutique tech investment bank, and every year we would do this big sort of tech
Conference.
conference.
Mhm.
He was invited as a speaker. We caught up after one of basically after his talk, and he was like, "Hey, could really use some help building out our finance team. Would you like to join?" And for me, just having an opportunity to work with someone that is so smart, so ambitious, and having a chance to really build a function and see what it takes to actually do that internally. Like, it's one thing to be a consultant or investment banker where you're really seeing it from the outside, but then to join and actually help lay the foundation, that was super exciting to me, and was grateful for that chance. And really, 5+ years at Optimize was really for me kind of the foundation for really understanding what it takes to build a hopefully an enduring startup.
And so Evan was one of your first semesters, right, at Script?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Was he also in your dorm?
He was not.
Okay.
I think we had met and crossed paths a few times at Stanford, but mostly through either social or sports. We both played a
Mhm.
lot of basketball, but then later on we reconnected. But yeah, we went to school at the same time, but weren't that close.
I mean, I bring it up because I think I constantly try to remind folks that your network is the most valuable asset you have, and the fact that you and Dan were connected from Stanford, and then you knew Evan, and all these people come back in your lives at some point. Like, I mean, when I started my first company, GSB friends were investors, college friends, and other folks that you've you've connected at some point in your life. But I think maintaining those relationships and reconnecting is super valuable. And it sounds like it's
100%.
happened
Yeah.
multiple times in your life.
Multiple times. I mean, I think if you're lucky enough to cross paths with someone where, you feel like you share a set of values or interests, or like you just generally, share that same level of energy and enthusiasm for something, that you got to do everything you can to stay in touch with that person over time. Networking these days gets a bad rap in general, but I do think there's a part of this where, putting yourself out there, meeting new folks, surrounding yourself with people that just energize you in general can never lead you down a bad path.
Mhm.
Like, you should be, if you're lucky enough to find those type of people, then yeah, staying in touch. And when I was first thinking about starting Gamma, Evan was one of the first people I reached out to because I knew he was doing more investing, and I just wanted to, get his honest thoughts about what we were building and to get his input and to learn, because
Mhm.
being at a startup versus being a founder obviously different, and there's just having the right mentality. If you're able to find people that can give you sort of really constructive and honest feedback at any stage of growth, like that's a gift. And you can only have that opportunity if you've been sort of investing in that basically all your life.
Yeah, and it helps if they can write a check too, so that worked out.
Of course, definitely help.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing I try to encourage people is like, there's people who are gonna ask you for coffee or to meet up, and, you might be like, "Oh, it's not worth my time," or this or that, but I've had countless interactions with people that I would have never thought, I mean, anything about, if I'd say no, it would never happen, but because I did, it opened up a lot of other doors that would have happened if I hadn't said yes. And I just found a connection with those. You're not going to find a connection with everyone you meet, but the few that do, I mean, it's amazing what can happen from just saying yes to a Zoom call or coffee.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this part of this is just it ends up becoming this virtuous cycle or like this reciprocation that happens, right? If you're
Hmm.
lucky enough early in your career to have found, a mentor or somebody that's taken a chance on you or just been super generous with their time, then obviously you're going to be more likely to want to pay it forward in the
Hmm.
future. And when you're early in your career, part of the way you can make that happen is just being proactive about reaching out. Like shoot your
Yep.
shot, find somebody you actually look up to, you think you can learn from.
Hmm.
And to your point, yeah, many cases, one, maybe they'll just say no. That's probably the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
But the one or two that end up, connecting what you're able to connect with, they might be able to just really change your perspective on things in general or put you on down a completely different path. For me, like even at Optimize, this could be both for like putting you down a path that you're already heading towards, but also like totally course correcting, changing your trajectory. For me,
Hmm.
when I was at Optimize, I had the chance to serve as interim CFO
Hmm.
running the entire finance org. And that path there is like maybe someday I'll be a public company CFO. And so I started networking with a lot of different CFOs that just say, hey, what does this career path look like? And I realized that actually that wasn't something that would, be energizing to me long term. It wasn't something that I could see myself doing. Like it's definitely, a great career, but it
Hmm.
wouldn't be one that I would, be excited about. And so what
Hmm.
I want to do, spend the next 5, 10 years of my life trying to continue down that path, or would I try to like veer off and find something else that could,
Hmm.
really energize me? And for
Hmm.
me, that went back to like going super early stage, leaning into much more on the operational side and understanding like how can I, help a business think through go to market strategy, or how
Hmm.
can I think through, this next phase of growth for a startup. And so I ended up going even earlier stage, joining, at the time a 5-person startup to run sales, go to market, because I felt like that would expose me to a completely new set of skill sets
Yep.
that
Yep.
align better with my long term ambition.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think at a young age we're not really encouraged to talk to folks who've been through that. Like if you're pre-med, how many doctors do you talk to about if they really like
Totally.
their job? Or if you're going to law school, it's like how many lawyers do you talk to? And if you had, you may have avoided a career that you actually didn't want to be in. And so it's always so helpful to get that insight from people who've been there before.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I get it. It can be pretty intimidating, and even from like a Asian household, maybe it doesn't always feel great to like reach out and ask somebody for
Yeah.
something when there's no expectation for you to build a return anything to them.
Yep.
Like like me reaching out to a public company CFO, like what am I going to offer
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
person? But you do almost need to get outside of your head. And honestly, one of the best things about being in the Bay Area is what you learn over time is that people are just so generous,
Hmm.
with their time, with their experience, and they are kind. And yeah, I don't know if that's every big city, but for us, like being able to be surrounded by people that have had great success in their careers, have worked at companies that have obviously been truly impactful, and to still be willing to like take time with a stranger and to give some feedback or advice. Like I've found that time and time again, and I
Yeah.
attribute a lot of it to just like whatever the special sauce is in the Bay Area. There's a lot of that, and I'm personally very grateful for it.
Yeah, that culture makes such a difference in why this ecosystem is there's so many startups thriving in this ecosystem because people are willing to give back. I mean, I think one of the things that holds us back, especially as Asians growing up in households that like we feel I think if you have scarcity mindset, things are very transactional. So when you see your parents fighting over a bill and then keeping tabs over who's going to pay the next time and how much is owed and everything, you feel like you don't want to ask anyone for help because you feel like you will owe them something or you can't pay them back or you can't. And so you'd be like, why would they ever want to talk to me if I have nothing to offer them? But plenty of people reach out to me now, and I mean, they have nothing to offer me. I have nothing to offer to them. But it's still saying yes can still lead to great things. And I feel like you know helping people when there might be nothing in return, it's fine because it might pay itself back. It may not, but I think having that mentality of a growth mindset that something could happen from it or it might doesn't matter. I think it helps a lot in terms of opening potential doors because otherwise we'd be thinking, what am I going to get out of this, what am I going to get out of this? I mean, that mentality is very small minded.
Yeah, 100% agree. As you become further along your career, you kind of if you see yourself as a leader, then you have a chance to kind of be proactive in that sort of, mindset. And I think there is, no expectation for something to come back to you. But in general, you give to the world will give back. And it may
Hmm.
not be any individual, and you shouldn't have that expectation. You should feel like you have an ability to really shape things. And that starts as small as like offering to, give a few minutes to somebody that could use your advice, and try your best to be generous with their time. And obviously easier said than done. Like the busier you get, like your calendar and everything just gets so
Yeah.
saturated with all the different things that require
Yeah.
your attention. But to the extent possible, always carving out time, always being willing to help. I think, yeah, that mindset hopefully serves people well.
Yeah, and I think that, with the transaction mindset, the other thing is I think like we always think about the ROI on every single thing we do. At least that's how I feel like my parents always thought of. And so it's like philanthropy, why would you do that? Because you get nothing back from that. But, giving time to a volunteer board, why would you do that? But I mean, there's so much can be gained in those relationships. There's no value on the relationships you build at these, on different boards or different places that you volunteer for. But yeah, so you were at Optimizely, and again, the network and the relationships you built, many of those folks or a number of those folks are with you at Gamma now. So the people you meet along the way, they come back somehow in your lifetime. But before you did that, you went over to Clearbrain for a couple of years after Optimizely. So once you decided I don't want to go public company CFO, then you went to Clearbrain after deciding I'm going to try operations.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of another sort of, I guess for me, Clearbrain was a sort of connection to a prior experience, which is at Optimizely. We had hired someone to basically PM our data science function, and that function eventually reported into me. Bilal was the person we hired, and he just did an exceptional job. One day, he told me he was going to go off and start his own company, a predictive analytics startup, which would become Clearbrain. And he asked me if I would join as an advisor. And I said, yeah, absolutely. He was one of the most special, folks I got a chance to work with at Optimizy, and have a chance to work with him was a no brainer. So ended up being an advisor for a couple years, got to see kind of his 0 to 1 journey as a founder. And then at some point, he was like, okay, I really need to scale up our go to market efforts. Like, would you want to help me? And so I ended up joining as their COO to build that function. And in my mind, it was a chance, going back to just, really trying to stretch yourself and like pull yourself into new opportunities. For me, I knew if I wanted to build my own company someday, it would be a great experience to really see what it takes to build, the go to market function, to understand sales and customer success, to understand building those relationships, and really mastering the sort of the art of selling and partnering with your customers. And so I took that opportunity, not having any of that experience myself. And Bilal was kind enough to also give me that shot. And then basically a couple years, we went from zero in revenue to just about 1 million in ARR when we got acquired by Amplitude, and ended up being, a great outcome for the team. I ended up not joining Amplitude full time, but stayed on as an advisor to Amplitude. And that was the chance where I finally had a chance to think about, okay, if am I ready? Is there a problem I care deeply enough to really pursue? And if so, can I go out, actually go out and start building my own company?
So there's a common thread throughout your career so far that you've gone and done things that you weren't necessarily good at to get better at it. Or you didn't when you didn't know something, you went and went to learn it. You did sales, you did finance, you learned things about business, but at every step of the way, um, decided to go take a chance and go stretch yourself and learn something. And sounds like that's a common thread. I've been writing this essay. I'm working on this essay about getting out of our comfort zones because I think too many people stay in their comfort zones and they don't want to feel uncomfortable. But I keep saying you never grow. Like the reason they're called growing pains is because it's uncomfortable when you actually do something you're not good at, and you only get good at something if you try it. But so many people, there's so much inertia in our lives that we don't even want to try something that we're not good at because you might fail, especially in cultures where failing is a bad feeling and you don't want that feeling. But it sounds like in your life, it's been a common theme of going to places and doing things that you weren't good at and learning.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is, at least for me, early on, yeah, I had no idea what I really want to do long term, but I knew that I think the first step was being honest with myself that, going down the path of staying in mechanical engineering, um, if I were really to try to fast forward my life 5 to 10 years, even if I were successful in terms of, pay and like stable job and all these things that maybe our parents really encouraged us to think about, I don't think I would have been happy. And and so I think, you can only make some of these bigger, bolder decisions when you're one, really honest with yourself, and two, are constantly asking yourself, like, what does happiness look like? What does success look like? Success when you're young oftentimes takes the shape of like what your parents define as success, being a doctor, being, and these are all great professions and we need them, but you need to ask yourself, like, does that definition of success align with your own personal
Hmm.
definition of success? And when you're young, you have no idea. So that's totally fine. And I think over time, you can start exposing yourself to different, experiences, definitely different roles, surrounding yourself with hopefully mentors and people that are many, many years ahead of you, and having honest conversations with them, like what about their profession or their career do they love, what parts are not as energizing to them, and start, kind of forming your own picture of what reality truly is, and then constantly going back to the question, like, am I currently on this path where
Hmm.
I feel like I'm moving towards success, not just someone else's predefined definition of what a great outcome looks like.
I think it really resonates with the stories that you tell about how you work backwards. You find a solution, you work backwards. And it's like you know that your ultimate goal is what is going to make you happy and what does success look like for you. And then you work backwards from that and you say, okay, well, I think it might be CFO, public company CFO, and you go explore that, or you talk to people and you find out, no, that's not it. Or you're like, I think it might be in, this or that. And you're like, okay, I'm going to learn the skills to do that. I'm going to talk to people and find out, and then you realize this isn't for me after all. I think it's kind of this experimentation is like, okay, I thought it was this, but it wasn't. So I guess I'm gonna, start like looking again at what is. But I think a lot of people who have a lot of inertia just assume it's gonna just happen to them. But if you don't change anything and you're already miserable, why would you assume that you're gonna get anything's gonna get any better?
Yeah. I think a lot of people just fall into the trap of just running on default, like whatever path you're on, just stay on it because that's the easy thing to do.
Least resistance,
And
yeah.
yeah, just resistance. And I think, yeah, the biggest, the thing I would challenge everyone to really think about is like, is that default path, one that you're going to look back on, and, going back to like the whole energy thing, like you want to be in a position where the work you're doing, truly energizes you, because that actually fuels you to build for the long term.
Hmm.
It also allows you to, measure success not by things like money or, these other, measures of like, accumulating material, goods. Like you
Hmm.
can do that, but like your measure of success should be, are you doing something every day that really energizes you? Are you
Hmm.
surrounding yourself with people that give you that energy? And like you would literally do it for free because it's,
Hmm.
it's something you really believe in.
Hmm.
If you haven't found that yet, that just means you should, keep searching for it.
Hmm.
I think settling is absolutely the worst thing you can do there. And I think most people, if they if they were able to really look back on like the things that have given them the most energy, and like how can they, really put themselves in a path where they can spend more time doing that, like that's a thing you should really focus, all of your
Yeah. And I feel like some people will justify like the bigger paycheck for what gives them energy, but I'm like, is it really what gives you energy, or is it what motivates you to stay at this job? Because it keeps you there. And golden handcuffs aside, it's like the more you do something that use your superpowers and that energizes you, you'll probably be much more successful doing that than something you're doing like kind of resentfully and kind of just like, oh well, I have to do this because it's a job and it pays well. I have to pay the mortgage and whatnot. The people I've seen who've pivoted their careers and taken a bigger chance on themselves, having agency, having ownership, having equity. I mean, it's game changing and life changing for them.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of people, money is just a very tangible measuring stick.
Hmm.
And going back to, I think many people are chasing maybe, their parents' dreams
Hmm.
and what their parents wanted for them, which is, have stable income, or, make a lot of money and be rich and do all the things you can do once you're rich.
Hmm.
But I guess for me, what I learned, growing up as a kid with very little money or no money, yeah, I realized that you don't need money to be happy.
Hmm.
Like we
Hmm.
had many moments as a family where, there was moments of just so much joy and being together, and like none of that required my parents to have a lot of money. It just required us to know what quality time means, and it
Mhm.
meant like me knowing that my parents, always were looking out for, were looking out for me. And so, if you grow up and if you're fixated on just the money piece of it, I think you're going to get to the point where, you get kind of in this sort of trap of like thinking more and more money makes you more and more happy. And every stage you get, you realize actually there's no amount of money that's
Mhm.
going to make you any more happy. Like if you can find happiness without money, that's the real, like that's what you
Mhm.
should be looking for. And if money is a great, if it's a side effect, then great. If you have enough just to feel secure and stable, that's great. Like that, you need that. I totally get that. But the
Mhm.
happiness portion, I think too many people
They
confuse
conflate.
the sort of
Yeah.
upside of like having more money and more happiness and conflating those two together. And that's,
Yeah.
almost in my experience, never the case.
Yeah. Um, and so for you, that wasn't what was driving you, but it's led to you to build a $2 billion company. What was it that, when you started Gamma, like, you after leaving Clearbrain, what was your decision? Because, I mean, I'm sure you had other options. You could have stayed on and went to Amplitude, but you wanted to start something. This was like, why was this time the time you want? Because you could have started something a long time ago, but why was it now? Why was the time right then?
I finally found something that, I could see myself working on for, the rest of my life. It's cheesy to say like find your life's work. And maybe some startup ideas don't start off being the full formed version of what you envision it. And that's totally fine. But when I started thinking about the problem space that we were operating in, so after Clearbrain basically ended up, tinkering on a bunch of different ideas. This one around reimagining the way people present and share their ideas, essentially replacing the default standard today, which is PowerPoint, with
Mhm.
something modern and new. That initial concept that was interesting to me, and so ended up prototyping nights and weekends with the two people that eventually became my co-founders on what could this look like if we actually reimagined it. And from my own sort of experience, slides, it's going back to when I first left, mechanical engineering, went and entered in consulting investment banking. I was living in slide decks, and slides are how, the most important decisions were communicated, how information spreads within a company, outside of a company. It is what they call the language of business. And for
Mhm.
me, the opportunity to reimagine a language, PowerPoint invented nearly 40 years ago,
Mhm.
that was exciting. And I knew it'd be incredibly difficult, but that was a problem. Like if we can change how people communicate their ideas, like what more inspiring problem to go after. And so for me, it was a no brainer to give it a shot. And I had been waiting a long time to find something that I felt like, every morning I wake up and I can't stop thinking about all the things we could do. And I had finally found something in the sort of, the precursor to Gamma. And that to me was, just a realization that we had to go all in.
And at this time, I mean, it sounds like your parents have always been supportive and they didn't need to worry about you. So, because you've proven that. So they were supportive also of this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they know what the entrepreneurial itch also looks like. They've had
Right.
it many times. And even like I'd say outside of my parents, my family, my uncle, my aunts, many of them have their own different
Mm.
entrepreneurial pursuits. And so I think they totally understood it. They didn't
Yeah.
understand what we were trying to build,
Yeah.
but they knew that I was gonna do it regardless. And
Yeah.
they were supportive from day one.
And how about all the naysayers out there and all the investors and friends who are like, PowerPoint, like AI for PowerPoint, what is that? No one wants that. Microsoft's gonna crush you, whatnot. Why would you even bother doing that? Like, how did you get through that?
Yeah, I mean, you like even today, you still, we still get
Mhm.
that. It's all about what I've learned is as a founder, you need to continue to build your own conviction every
Mhm.
step of the way. So you can do that in many different ways. In the beginning, when you have no product, well, build a prototype and use it yourself. Like, is this something where the concepts you're putting out there, does this feel interesting, different, better than what the incumbents are exploring? And in the beginning, it may feel like, I'm not really sure. So you keep prototyping, riffing on things, iterating, get this to the next level of fidelity. And for us, a good sort of forcing function was, okay, we had this prototype we're kind of excited about. What if I show this prototype to investors?
Mhm.
Do I have enough of my conviction will be the way I tell the story, or I pitch the sort of vision. And if I can't raise money off that, then
Mhm.
it probably means I don't have enough conviction. So let's
Mhm.
test this. Let's go out and see if our prototype is good enough to make others believers. And if we can, then that earns us the right to keep building and go to the next, chapter. But it doesn't mean we're done. It just means
Mhm.
we've made it through this next sort of
Yeah.
milestone. And we've treated every milestone just like that. It's just another
Mm.
chance to continue to build conviction. At some point, you get paying customers and you want to grow. And it's like, okay, well, what does it take to reach even more users to
Mhm.
accelerate growth? And so we're still in that chapter of like, now we have a strong, base of users. What is the next chapter for us? We have to keep
Mhm.
building that conviction because otherwise, there's no point in, you can just, if you feel like you're done, then you might as well just sell your company, or
Yeah.
move on, or let someone else take over the business
Yeah.
because you feel like it's complete. And we're just so far from feeling
Mhm.
complete. And it just goes back to what's the next level of conviction we
Mhm.
need to earn for ourselves.
So before like all of this, you launched on product hunt in 22 after starting in 20. Product of the day, product of the week, product of the month, flying high, feeling good, and then growth stalls out, installs the word of mouth's not there. I mean, I know that feeling because when I've launched a few products and it's like, oh, it's great. We got some users, but then it just the Google Analytics, everything starts going the wrong direction. You're like, oh no. How did you react to that?
Yeah, I mean those moments, I feel lucky for me, we've built a team where I have two co-founders where there's just so much deep trust in that,
Mhm.
none of these things are things I'm ever trying to figure out on my own. It's stuff
Mhm.
that as a team we're thinking through. But going back to, one of the themes I brought up earlier is like you have to be at every stage super honest with yourself
Mhm.
and not fool yourself. It's way easier for you to fool yourself than anybody than anybody
Yep.
else to fool
Yep.
yourself. And so don't fall into that trap. Like it's easy to fool yourself to say, "Oh, hey, we saw this huge spike in signups. Maybe even though they've sort of flattened out, maybe if we just put more in marketing, like that's going to
Mhm.
solve everything. We just, continue figuring things out that way." And I think that would have been a lie to ourselves because
Mhm.
the reason things had sort of flattened out is because there isn't strong word of mouth. We
Mhm.
weren't seeing organic virality in our product, which means the product isn't good enough for people to tell their friends or tell their
Mhm.
colleagues or tell their family. And so that's not a thing that marketing is going to fix. So let's go
Mhm.
back and actually fix that in the product. And so we end up spending, 4 months really going back to the basics, like the first 30 seconds of your product. Let's get that right.
Mhm.
And then earn the next 30 seconds with a customer. And so going back to it has to start with honesty with yourself, and then it has to start with hopefully a team that is bought in on what it's going to take to actually, ship something that's going to be, has a chance of winning long term.
So what is your product approach? I mean, in terms of like the reason why Gamma became successful is first 30 seconds, but then after that, like there's always another thing that you have to do to keep getting more users. I mean, what is your philosophy around kind of building product or, product design?
Yeah, I would say it probably differs a lot by category. For us, when you're trying to build for, uh, the in our case, a very horizontal product, you want to eventually become a product that can be mainstream. So you're
Mhm.
building for mass market. So you need to build something that has a chance of solving some sort of universal pain point or set of challenges, and try to do so in a way that is very, very differentiated from the incumbents, right? Whoever else is in that category, you're either trying to really try to change behavior change because they're adopting your product, or you're introducing something net new that they weren't doing before. In our case, we were very much in the former. It's like behavior change is hard,
It's
so it's got
hard.
to be a huge incentive for them to they have to actually believe that
You're
it's
better.
worth their time, right?
Yeah.
And so going back to the foundation of your product or your principles should be, are you building something truly different and not just incrementally better? A lot of people that have tried to approach this category have said, okay, we're going to try to be, 10x better. Like better
Mhm.
is oftentimes a trap because,
Mhm.
incrementally better is oftentimes not good enough for that behavior change
Mhm.
piece. And so we've approached it to say, okay, we may not be better in many different categories, but we will be different. And by being different, we're going to solve some subset of pain
Mhm.
points in a unique way.
Hmm.
And for us, there was just always like many of our users, they don't see themselves as designers. They struggle with design. They are not maybe the most technical, so don't necessarily are not necessarily taking advantage of the most advanced even features within PowerPoint. But they do need a visually communicate. They do need a story. And so how can we make it dead simple for them to get started and then also continue to shape their ideas within our product? And so
Yeah.
that's kind of like the North Star is like making it dead simple for the users we care about, and then being sort of relentless about iterating every single step of the way,
Hmm.
constantly chasing this notion of craft, which to me is, thinking about how do you sand down all the rough edges of your product over and
Hmm.
over and over
Hmm.
again? How do you not lose sight of simplicity in your
Yeah.
product? And even as the product gets more complex, making sure that for the user, it's still hopefully a very delightful experience.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I love about Gamma is that it's almost like if I needed to pay a present person or designer to make my presentation, I'm essentially asking them to do the same things and fix this. Can you fix that? I have to wait till they finish it and then come back, return. But with Gamma, I can actually just in real time modify things, and it pulls out bullet points and things that I wouldn't have even thought of to highlight. And it's like, actually, that works pretty well. So it's like a collaborative, like assistant or friend that I feel like I can use, and that's I think that's the broad appeal of that is that's everyone who has to make a presentation. So I mean, I think that's why it resonates.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's certainly no shortage of people that also use presentations regularly, and so how can we empower them to do way more than they ever thought they could, especially on
Yeah.
their own, and make that feel going back to this notion of a delightful experience. I do think one cool thing that you're seeing with a lot of the AI apps today and the ones that are just doing so well, I think they're bringing a level of delight to the sort of product experience where it feels fun. Like,
Yeah.
nobody would have ever said like, sitting in PowerPoint was probably, the
Fun.
highlight of their day. But if you can deliver a tool where all of a sudden, they're using it, they're finding some joy, they're actually, to your point, like going beyond what they could have even imagined on their own, that part of it is again for us like super energizing and again where we feel like we're barely scratching the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something about AI and whether it's ChatGPT generating an image or Sora or whatnot, is that the unwrapping of, okay, I'm waiting for it to generate, waiting for it to generate, and it pops open as like a gift, like, oh, this is cool. I would have never thought of that or seen that, or that's how not how I thought
Totally,
designed
yeah.
it
It's like
myself.
having a creative partner, yeah,
Yeah,
doing it with
and it's
you.
like this unwrapping, like, it's like more than a surprise, "Here's your gift." And I was like, "Oh," but there's something delightful about getting that, like getting the package come in the mail and you open it up or whatnot, but I talk a lot about how there's a stereotype that, Asians aren't great leaders. This is the this bamboo ceiling excuse that so many folks have. What is like, I've seen you lead in public in your interviews and online and LinkedIn and whatnot with your thought leadership. What is your leadership style and what do you think makes good leader?
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping, leaders like Jensen out there are really trying to, break this stereotype
Yep.
and I'm excited about that. I feel, obviously very inspired by his style of leadership. And I think what I found is that, every leader needs to think about what style of leadership feels authentic to them.
Mhm.
You don't need to be the most loud person,
Mhm.
up in front of the room trying to energize people that way. Like you should find your own path that can be authentic. Maybe it isn't as loud, maybe it is the quiet but confident, and figuring out what that looks like for yourself, because I think your team will at the end of the day like they want to feel someone is authentic in their approach. And for me, some of the ingredients are being so committed to what we're doing. Like this is everything I'm thinking about. I want this team to succeed. I want the individuals on this team to succeed. I want this business to succeed because it means we'll have reached more users. And I want our users to feel like they're winning when they use our product. And I think, going back to what I think is important is if you're authentic about that, if that's truly the case, then your team should feel that in your
Mhm.
actions. um, I think going back to Jensen as an example, like for someone that's been doing that for decades now, that's just insane. Like the sort of loyalty he has to his business, to his team that has seen so many different chapters of growth and insane growth, and to still be there. And when you hear him talk about what they're building and why he's excited about the future. Like it just feels genuine, and I love that. And I feel like if you're doing that, like, who isn't going to want to follow a leader
Yep.
like that? Like that just feels like so inspiring. And again, he's not going to be the loudest leader. He's definitely not going to be the type that is going to try to push his team to do things that he probably wouldn't do himself. And that just goes back to that type of leadership. I think hopefully will be more well received in the future and should be one of the many different archetypes of great leadership.
I mean, I can see that one of the strengths that one of your superpowers, and one of the reasons why I would think that people follow you is that you're a great storyteller, and that's not necessarily something that people talk about as an important strength. They don't teach that at business school. They don't teach that, but I feel like storytelling is probably the most important skill you can have for whether it be fundraising or leading a team or inspiring people. Jensen is a great storyteller. How have you honed your storytelling and writing? Because I don't think that's something that, everyone just has. It's something that you have to work on. How have you kind of focused on it? Is that something that you've intentionally worked on?
Yes, very much so. I think one thing I learned while trying to run sales at Clearbrain, so before Gamma, is that sales can oftentimes have this negative stigma of like, oh,
Mhm,
you know, to be a good salesperson means you're trying to manipulate
mhm,
somebody or like trying to be overly persuasive. And
mhm,
that's absolutely, just not the point at all. And I think if you've
mhm,
ever met like a great talented salesperson, like you know that they actually are oftentimes the best listeners. They're
mhm,
great problem solvers. They have deep empathy for what the customer is going through. And so I think just reframing what sales and broadly what I consider storytelling to mean and like how valuable it is, then you realize that okay, it's like any other skill. You have to try to invest in it. And I do think writing is a great way just to force yourself to have some clarity around thinking. And you realize, I think Paul Graham's the one that says like, you actually realize how little you know about a subject until you start writing about it because, really start exploring the depth of your own knowledge. And I think it's one great way of just getting some of that, your initial ideas out there. You want to, over time, just be able to actually then lean on some of these stories you can tell, over and over, like things again that are feel like authentic. Because as a founder, you end up realizing, whether you call it selling or storytelling, you have so many different audiences you need to win over.
mhm,
Have candidates that are considering joining you versus the 10 other hot AI startups, and like why you guys have investors that have many different opportunities, and why should they write a big check to you,
mhm,
and what are you going to do with that money, how are you going
mhm,
to turn that money into 10x 100x.
mhm,
You have your customers who, again, going back to behavior change, all the other tools they could be using or sticking with, like why should they give you the time of
mhm,
day. You realize like every part of this just requires an ability for you to build that sort of connection with
mhm,
the other person, with other company. And you're not going to do that if you aren't able to create some sort of authentic story that resonates with them. And I believe you do that by practicing both small things like the things you post on LinkedIn or X, Twitter, or you do that with the bigger things when you're fundraising or going on stage and doing a keynote. And so every opportunity is just a chance to sort of practice and certainly then also be inspired by the greats out there, the folks
mhm,
like Jensen who have been doing it for decades now. Like
mhm.
when you watch someone like him present or storytell, it's masterful. And so how do you pick up some of those techniques yourself and integrate that into your own practice?
Yeah, I mean, this is why you have 100,000, almost 100,000 followers on LinkedIn because, the stories are amazing. And one of the recent posts you posted about was Dan Coe talking about how you can engage people. And a lot of folks think, I can't be a good storyteller because I'm not charismatic enough, or I just am not good on, I'm an introvert, all these excuses for why not. But he talks about this inner album of greatest hits.
Yep, I love
Can you
that.
elaborate on that and how, because maybe it could give people a gift of getting to become a good storyteller?
Yeah, totally. I love so there is something I tell a lot of founders that reach out and say like, oh, how do I get into content creation, or how do I put myself out there more. And I tell them like sometimes you have to, the thing I call it is like you have to get through cringe valley in the beginning to be able to actually make it to the other side. In cringe valley is just this notion of like some of the things you put out there in the beginning, it feels weird to even say it, and it feels like, oh, my friends are gonna make fun of me, or like someone else reads this is gonna be painful. And there is some truth to that because you're still sort of shaping your own perspective. But
Hmm.
the reality is, like, you put something out that nobody engages with, nobody sees it anyway.
Yeah.
So it gets like 2 likes and it gets like
Yeah.
2 views, then
Who cares?
who cares? And so you have to kind of put yourself out there, start practicing, and you'll notice that like maybe a few of your posts are picking up some traction. And those are the areas where you can start doubling down. Like, you start building your greatest hits, which is, what are the things that are at the intersection of things you care about, things you have an interesting perspective on, and what others might be find like either timely or relevant. And you won't really know until really put out a variety of ideas. And the ones that start picking up a little traction, then you start doubling down and say, okay, what else might I post about in the space? And can I also pull from different people's perspective to remix some people's like ideas
Yeah.
or thoughts? And I think that's where you got to earn your right to kind of do that in the beginning, kind of suffer through some of the.
Yeah, the cringe. I mean, this is, I know you have to go, but um, one of your greatest hits seems to be this theme of mid-career folks who've switched careers and started something new and been successful at it. I know a lot of our listeners are in those mid-careers, and I mean, just want to hear kind of why do you write about these stories? What inspires you to write about these stories specifically, especially since you were kind of one of those late entrepreneurs, late career entrepreneurs? What makes it so important to you to tell these stories?
Yeah, I just want people to not be their own worst enemy. There's so many reasons to have doubt and to give up or just not to kind of pursue your dreams early in your career. That could be shaped by, your parents or others people's expectations of you. Later in your career, you may not have those same challenges, but you may be your own worst enemy.
Hmm.
And I just want them to realize, like, hey, it's never too late to get started. If Morris can go on and build one of the most successful businesses of all time way later in his career when, quote unquote, he was put out to pasture,
Yep.
then anybody has a chance. And
Yep.
if you have something you believe in, you owe it to yourself to really give it a shot. And if you don't have the confidence in yourself, then surround yourself with people that
Mm,
have their own sort of ambitions and maybe have the same values as you and maybe one or two steps ahead of you, but surround yourself with people that are going to pull you along and
mhm.
hopefully fuel you with with the level of energy and excitement you're going to need. I write about a lot of these stories because I think many people think that, some of this is like they're predestined to do something great. And I
Mhm.
just don't believe that. I think
Yeah.
many of them realize something either early in the career or later in the career. It doesn't matter when they realize they're put on earth to do something special, and they take that first step. And this is where I really really believe that anybody can take that first step, and I'm hoping I can be that, even if it could be a small spark, be that initial spark, so that they're willing to give themselves a chance.
Yeah, I mean, your story is one of those stories, and I'm glad I can be a part of that and share that story as well. I think it's a reminder to folks that you can make excuses, you can blame other people, you come with all sorts of reasons not to do it, but at the end of the day, you have agency to make a choice and do what you want to do. And inertia, bills, whatever it might be, you can keep talking about your way out of it, but at the end of the day, it's still up to you. And so, thank you for telling these stories, Grant, for being you and for sharing with us today. I think seeing your example is going to really inspire a lot of people, and I can't wait to see, you become the next Jensen out there and inspire the next generation. But thanks again for taking the time, Grant.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dave. This is great. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hyphen Nation. Please subscribe to my Substack at www.davelou.com and follow us on Instagram at the Hyphen Nation and LinkedIn at Hyphen Nation.